neuro. It is so trendy now. So can you please help our Performance Intelligence podcast audience to understand what is neuroscience from your perspective and what is neuroplasticity?
That's the kind of the neuro hype. That's the word. And I remember the first time I heard that word as well. It must have been early 2000, 99, 2000. I was in my PhD lab. So I did 4 years in Oxford. The first was a master's, then my PhD lab. And the two guys that I went through my PhD with, Matthew Grubb and Colin Ackerman, are now both professors of neuroscience. Colin's still in Oxford. And he mentioned this word plasticity that he had read somewhere in one of the journals back in the days when we used to read them as magazines in the library. I miss that so much. He was the first person I ever heard mention the word plasticity to describe the idea that the connections between neurons could be shaped or changed by experience. And I just remember we were all like, that's a really good description. That's a good word. That makes sense. And now everyone uses it. But we were using it to mean a very, very specific biological mechanism that we were working on and describing.
That's very different to what I was taught in my first degree, Sarah, which was exercise physiology with a double major in sports coaching. And we were taught the brain develops up until the age of early 20s and then pretty well you set and forget. So for a number of years, people were taught, weren't they, that you have this brain development and then early 20s, you don't get a lot more formation, a lot more development after that.
Well, we didn't really learn that in neuroscience. I think that's when you're in the neurosciences, we weren't kind of making big claims like that. We were going, what happens when, and so this is where to sort of define about what we were talking about and the fact that I was never taught that in all my years of neuroscience, even in the early 90s. When you look at this idea that the brain changes, as I said, you can zoom in and you can zoom out, and there's lots and lots of different levels in which we can observe the brain. So we can kind of look at like a whole brain, hold it in your hands, or you can scan it and you can look at the structure with MRI, or use different types of brain imaging to look at the functional networks and how they interact. And then you can kind of zoom in and perhaps look at smaller sections of the brain. We can do that using little pieces of brain from animals. We don't take little pieces of brain from humans. And then you can kind of zoom down and look at it at the cellular level, and then look at it at the kind of the connective level, the connections between neurons, and then the molecular level. And at each of those levels, to a certain degree, the brain will change in response to what happens to it, whether that be during development, whether that be during learning, whether that be while you're remembering something new, while you're forming a memory, even if it's just what you had for breakfast, or the ability to read a book and remember what you read at the top of the page to the bottom of the page. And then we see the brain sort of shaping and changing and growing at all of these levels throughout the lifespan. And so neuroplasticity includes all of those changes, from patterns of electrical activity changing at a microscopic level, to synapses flourishing and growing, to maps in the brain reorganizing, to actual volume changes. And we were never taught, well, the brain doesn't change, because we were always learning about how memories are formed and how learning happens at synapses. So we always knew the brain changed to a certain level. So we were never taught, the brain doesn't change. Oh, that said, I specifically remember in my honours year when I was at Otago, so that was in 1996, we were doing a sort of a section on I suppose it would have been neuroplasticity, except the word wasn't neuroplasticity, then maybe brain growth and development or something. And we were looking at how representations of the body on the cortex of the brain. So like if you zoom in on the brain, there'll be little parts of the brain that'll control like the movement or the sensation in each finger. And we were looking at a very, very famous study that had kind of been published in the early 90s, showing that organization of that could change in response to stimulation. Now, that was really cool. That wasn't like we were going, we thought the brain never changed at all at any point through the lifespan. It was more this aspect of brain organization we didn't think changed much. So I think sometimes that story gets told and it's hype. made more of than actually was reality when you were working in the neuroscience lab at the time. We always knew the brain changed. It just depended on which level of it you were looking at, whether you were zooming all the way in or out.
But I don't think the information had got out of your world into mainstream up until...
I don't think it has yet.
Oh, really? So
people still tell
now,
that stories of scientists thought the brain didn't change, but we've just learned it does. And it's like, no, Cahal, who was, one of the kind of, we could call him the great godfather of neuroscience, and that he was the first person to draw neurons, pen and paper, look down the microscope and draw neurons. He described neurons growing and changing throughout adulthood. He might not have used this concept of neuroplasticity, but it was described centuries ago. I just think it was translated to mean something different to the general public.
So Carl, you mean Carl Jung?
No, Ramoni Cajal, Cajal, who was he won the Nobel Prize for developing a certain particular type of staining technique and then drawing neurons under the microscope.
Gotcha.
And Donald Hebb, who Hebbian plasticity is named after, which is a particular type of synapse plasticity, which we think is kind of forms perhaps the basis of learning and memory, that he was describing that kind of in the 1930s. So we knew the brain changed at a microscopic level. It was more just at that macroscopic brain organisation level. We didn't think it changed much.
And then everyone went crazy, and the sales went crazy. Norman Doidge, the brain that changes itself as well.
Look, he was one of the grey-haired American gentlemen that did a reasonably good job getting the stories out there. I think he hyped the idea up and gave people a lot of false hope. We've still got, young man not far from us here last year has a spinal cord injury from a mountain bike accident. He's not walking yet, despite Norman Doidge's hype and hope. Just because we know the word neuroplasticity doesn't mean we've got young men who can, recover from their spinal cord injuries very well. So I remain slightly cynical about how the word is thrown about as if suddenly we can cure the brain, or heal the brain if it's damaged. We're still left with the exact same problem. The CNS does not regenerate. We're starting to understand why, but we're not very good at encouraging it to do so. That's why we still have people with spinal cord injuries and wheelchairs,
What else really peeves you, or you're a good Kiwi girl, what pisses you off about this whole field that's been taken out of context, or people go to a course for a day and suddenly they're neuro-armed and using all these terms and a bit dangerous?
Look, I'm not too pissed off if people are interested in neuroscience. I think that the problem is a lot of people aren't learning about neuroscience from neuroscientists. That's my main concern. Is for me, it's plainly obvious when someone has gained their information about the brain from someone who's never studied the brain as a scientific discipline, because of the language they use, the ideas that are often many decades old and just simply not up-to-date contemporary neuroscience. And also they're less comfortable with the shades of grey or the unknowns, or the fact that scientists know that science is a method. It's a process. It's not a set of facts that are immutable. Once we find them out, there they are. We're comfortable with that the sort of the uncertainty or the shades of grey, or saying we don't know, or saying, well, I'm not an expert on that. I couldn't say. I'll go and find out someone who is. And so my peeves, if I'm going to have a peeve about anything to do with neuro as a prefix, is that people aren't getting their neuro information from the right sources. You wouldn't go and learn most things from someone who wasn't an expert in that field.
Oh, I don't know. I'll get a bit skeptical on you now with the internet, and someone can be an influencer in inverted commas and suddenly they are an expert because they've got millions of followers.
If you want to, get some professional training from them, that's your risk.
So a question I've got for you, and you've got a good balance between it. I've worked with a lot of academics, and with respect, a lot of them are really deep on the science, but there's no stickiness or storytelling. So they can go deep and they can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, but then when they go to zoom out, they can't see the practical application. You've got this really nice dance between understanding the science and then the utility or the practical application. What can our listeners take specific to neuroscience? So we've spoken about the evolution, you're passionate about it. Do you want to go through the evolution, or is there another pathway to really help people listening to this get some of the practical application or the utility to make better use of their brain? Because you see what I'm saying? There's one thing we can know and learn all this info, but then how do we apply that to, I'll be really specific, how do we apply that to be better under pressure? How do we apply that to be a more human work colleague? How do we be more creative? How do we really understand our children's emotions? Insert.
There's a lot of things there.
I just got deep on you, didn't I?
Yeah, so I think, and I don't really have a problem with academics being sticky or not, because, most academics are working in academia, working on solving the problems with the science and sharing that information with each other, and they're not translating it out into the general public because that's not their primary objective, and that's fine. There's loads of people who are really good at that. And not everyone can be good at everything. And that we call them the soft skills, but they're actually the hardest of hard skills to learn.
I hate that term.
You've got to, as I say, you've got to narrow down and become an expert in a very, very niche topic to succeed. And you don't, by virtue, you can't pull back and see the big picture, unless maybe you're doing first year lectures or something, I don't know. So I don't really have a problem with that, because there's loads of good communicators out there. So the takeaway or the framework or the model that I always teach when I'm talking about neuroscience is, if you've got any problem or idea or question that you want to neuroscience, there's a couple of ways of asking about it. People can get super, super reductionist, and they can go, I want to understand why my teenage son doesn't talk to me, what's happening at the synaptic level. So you're asking this big picture question, and you want to zoom all the way in and get this really finessed little answer that you can't. Or there's a cool piece of neuroscience about, something to do with an axon and, transmission along an axon of an action potential, but that's irrelevant to leadership, for example. So I try, first of all, to get people to be very specific and clear about their expectations of the questions that they are asking. And if they get a super reductionist answer, it might not be relevant or make sense. So I teach this model or framework, which is loosely based on the biopsychosocial model, which I'd use to try and give people an idea about how complex the information that the brain is processing, and where you can kind of push or pull or tweak levers. And so I kind of put the brain in the middle, and I talk about how the brain is receiving information from our body, from the bottom up, from our biology. Data is streaming in from the outside world, and it comes into our brain through our senses. It's not magic or ESP. It comes in through our eyes mostly, because we're humans and we're very visual, through what we hear. And then if it's close enough, we can smell it or taste it or touch it. And then we've also got, the biopsychosocial model calls it psycho, like as in mind or psychology. But how our brain processes all of this information from our body and the outside world is also shaped and sculpted by the activity of the brain itself, by our thoughts, by our expectations, by our prior experiences. So I say we'll start at the bottom up body, the biology. What's this information that's coming into the brain that the brain is making meaning of, and it's receiving data about, your gut pH based on how long ago you ate food and the various hormones that may be in your gut, and you wouldn't have a clue what those hormone levels are, but your brain knows. You consciously aren't aware of them, but you might become aware of them if you get hungry, say. Whether your bladder's full or not, if you've got an achy back. Whenever I give a podcast and I'm giving this explanation, I'm always like, oh, that's right, I've got pins and needles in my knee because I always curl my leg up under me. So we've got information about our posture that we can feel. But all of this, like your brain has information about your bone density, but you wouldn't have a clue what your own bone density is. But that information is there. So some of it is...
Well, I do, because I did a DEXA scan recently.
Yeah, but because you received the information from out there. So your brain already was receiving information about that. You just didn't have that in your conscious awareness. So we've got interoception, which is what we can sense in our body. And a lot of that gets misinterpreted if you want to talk about emotions and stress. But we have, things like rising and lowering heart rate and breathing rate, etc. And then we've got all of the information, some of which we will never have conscious access to because we don't really need to know. And then we've got the outside-in world streaming in. So we've got everything from, the rising and setting of the sun and the light-dark cycle, which is fundamentally important to, cueing circadian rhythms and every kind of the
We've
biological.
done whole podcast on that. It's such a
so you know all
basic.
about that?
Well, a lot of people don't know that. Like a lot of people, if they get that biology part right, and that's why I love that whole biopsychosocial model when I first saw that, because it's a full system. It's multi-system, isn't it? It's a whole interconnection.
Yeah. So, and there's the information coming in about other people, not just through us perceiving the information on their faces and kind of making some cognition around that, but, you know, that their smell or their sound or their taste. And then there's, of course, the entire world once upon a time was beyond the horizon and we never paid attention to it. And we were much happier then, back in the olden days. And now, like, the whole world's streaming in through this ridiculous device, non-stop. And not like it's no longer on the other, beyond the horizon. It might be on the nightly news. It's 10 centimeters. Well, it depends how old you are, how far away it is from your face. So that's streaming in and demanding that you make meaning of that. And then we've got, of course, our thoughts and all of these inputs, you know, our memories, our expectations, the streaming in information from our body and the outside world. It's all being made meaning of by our brain, by all of the very complex processes in the brain. And the brain's going, okay, what am I going to do with all of this? And what am I going to do next? Do I need to sweat because it's hot? Do I need to stand up and go into another room and let the dog out because I can hear it crying and I know that when it makes that cry, it needs to do a wee, and I don't want to clean up the floor again? Do I need to, you know, go and get a drink of water because I'm thirsty? Do I need to sit down and study for the maths exam that's coming up in a few days' time because it'll reduce my nerves if I know I'm prepared? So there's a billion things that the brain is making meaning of and then figuring out what we do next. And that's the best way I can get anyone to think about how complex neuroscience is. And then you can put a question in the middle, like, say, insomnia. I just taught this in a class the other day. We were like, right, we drew let me see if I've got the drawings we did. If we're really lucky, I might even have one of the drawings that we did of insomnia from the bottom up, outside in, top down. You can see that. So insomnia in the brain. And it was like, well, what might some factors that might be influencing someone to develop, not even insomnia, but they can't fall asleep at night. They're having trouble falling asleep at night, say that kind of falling asleep insomnia. And so from the bottom up, we're like, let's come up with like 2 factors for each of these. So we've got coffee. Maybe they're drinking coffee at 4 in the afternoon, or like my father-in-law at 8 at night. They're not doing any exercise. Perhaps they're not focusing on sunlight. Instead, they're getting not enough daylight during the daytime. They're getting a lot of night light during the nighttime from their screen. Or, you know, perhaps they're freaking out about some external stressful event like COVID, I like to put earthquakes in as my example because I grew up in Christchurch and they have earthquakes. Or top down, you know, perhaps you've developed some kind of rumination. You've got a thought going around in your head and you can't kind of find your way out of it. You're chewing it over but not coming up with a solution. Or, you know, or perhaps actually you're suffering from depression. So you can kind of break down your problem into, is it a biological problem? Is it a problem out there in the world? Is it something psychological? And then perhaps you go, oh, you know what? It's just because I drink coffee after dinner every night. I have a couple of Nescafes after dinner.
And caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours.
Well, then you can go, well, tell me about what's happening in the brain when I have coffee. And then you could get into, we understand how caffeine interacts with the adenosine receptor. Adenosine is a molecule that's released by our brain over the course of a day. And as it rises, we get sleep drive, increased sleep drive. So as adenosine goes up and up and up, we kind of feel sleepier. Like if you try to stay awake all night, you actually fight. You're having to fight really hard to stay awake. That's sleep drive. That's one of the signals to sleep. It's not the melatonin signal. It's the adenosine signal. And coffee bumps into the receptor for adenosine and stops adenosine locking in. So your sleep drive doesn't rise. And so then you've got a much more refined neuroscience question based on, you've asked a big question, you've narrowed it down, you can focus just on one point. And that's the model I teach to try and explain that neuroscience is really, really complicated and there's a whole lot of levers to push or pull.
But I love that framework. Are you happy for us to put that up in our show notes as a copy, that example? And when you look at any problem as a neuroscientist, you look at that bottom up. So you're looking at the physiological, outside in, you're looking at the external world, and then inside out. So outside in and top down. Top down, you're looking at the thoughts.
Yeah. And that just gives people a really visual framework to think, because most people aren't asking, how does coffee bump adenosine off a adenosine receptor? People aren't asking that level of sophistication. They're asking, why can't I fall asleep at night? Tell me about the neuroscience of that. And so then I give them a basic framework, and then if they want to, we can go the next step further. So that's how I approach teaching. You've got to start off with the big picture, and then we can go the next step further, and then we can go the next step further and make it meaningful to them.
Yeah. Let's say there's a guy I know, he's 50, he's almost 6'3", he's got a kid who's 12, about to become a teenager, guy I know really well. Yeah, asking for a really good friend of mine. Can we do that model? Bottom up,
absolutely.
Outside in, top
I'm very
down?
familiar. I have two teenage sons and a teenage boy dog.
Okay.
The funniest thing about the teenage boy dog and the teenage sons is when the teenage dog likes to hump the teenage boys and they don't like it. There's a lot. I say there's like testosterone dripping off the ceiling and down the walls of my house at the moment. Well, it's like wildlife documentary. And I think teenage boys are awesome and fun and funny. Teenage girls, as I experienced with friends coming over with all their daughters to see Taylor Swift, that's another whole level of intensity. My experience of boys is that they are a little bit more straightforward, but there's less transparency.
One of my friends who's a psychologist, and I won't mention her name, I don't have permission to share this story, and I'm sure she'd be fine, but, for professional code, I won't share her name, but she said teenage daughters are beautifully nuanced and complicated.
They certainly are. But there's a lot more chat, so sometimes I'm the only person talking in my house. But teenagers, the quickest way to explain it is that male and female, boys and girls, brains go through puberty too. And we've all been through puberty, whether we were male or female, and we know what happens. We also understand brains also go through puberty too. And male brains are kind of primed in utero to kind of be ready and waiting for when puberty hits, for the testosterone to kind of guide that next stage of development. And interestingly, even though female brains aren't experiencing the testosterone, they are kind of primed and ready to wait for the estrogen to kind of set them off through their adolescent phase of development. And both brains, male and female brains, track through the adolescent phase of development. There was just a different sex hormone that kind of pushed go almost. But then they kind of end up in it, they end up as adult brains on the other side. Now, there did used to be this phrase, and you actually said it earlier about brains that don't finish developing until they're 25. Actually, a really large study came out, and we're getting really good new data coming through from science now because, one, we're getting biobanks and we're getting collaboration and sharing of data. So scientists can sort of pull all of their data, particularly brain imaging data, and then draw from it. So instead of having 17 brains that they scanned and the data they're analysing on an Excel spreadsheet, they could have 17,000 from around the world, and they've got the raw data, and then they can take that and analyse that, and they can use machine learning and AI. So that the questions we can ask and the sophistication with which we can answer them is suddenly, it's like a hockey stick curve. So it's really exciting time right now just because of the data coming out. But we see very clearly from the large studies of adolescents, children through into adolescence, there's actually quite a considerable acceleration of brain development in early puberty, kind of depending on when you sort of start, sort of 10, 11, 12, through to about sort of 15, 16, 17. That's when the greatest acceleration and rate of change is happening in terms of the structural changes that we see and then the functional changes that we're seeing in teenage brains. First of all, the main structural change that we see during adolescence is we see the volume of the cortex, particularly the prefrontal cortex and those parts of the brain involved with things like social cognition, but also higher order executive functioning, things like problem solving and reasoning, kind of judgment, kind of clear thinking, the sort of skills that you develop at high school, you would hope, right when the brain is ready to learn them. those parts of the brain are becoming, the volume of the cortex is becoming slightly less. And that's not degeneration, that's sort of streamlining and refinement. So essentially the brain has kind of built up all of these connections. Puberty opens up this window of plasticity, of experience. And then the experiences that we have in that time guide and wire that development. So it's experience-driven development, and the plasticity that enables that is kind of started off by the pubertal hormones. And we can be really horrible to teenagers. And I think that we've developed this dreadful language, which I'm also quite a fan of trying to change around the teenage brain. Well, it's not fully developed until it's 25, or it's undergoing renovation, or it's half developed. It's not quite in adulthood yet. And any sort of stumbles or falls or missteps that teenagers make, we go, oh, it's their brain, their adolescent brain. But if you think about it, like a little child, like an infant or a little toddler learning to walk and learning language and learning to talk is also going through this stage of brain development, this critical period of plasticity when the experiences they have matter. When they fall over or mispronounce a word, but go, oh, their brain, it's not fully developed yet. It's only halfway up to, 5. We shouldn't expect them to speak properly yet with their little half-formed brain. We don't use the same language that we use around teenagers, which I think is to a disservice to teenagers and a disservice to everyone else, because teenagers' brains are actually primed for learning and primed for experiences and primed for social connections and primed to learn critical thinking and reasoning and, all that, develop all of those skills. They don't just learn them by default. They learn them from the world around them. And so it's kind of on us as the non-teenagers who are living and supporting and helping grow these young people to provide those experiences for them. I'll say another word here about mood, because I think it's more important for girls as much as boys, because we start giving girls going through puberty this message that as soon as you've got a female sex hormone and a female brain, that equals mood. And it equals negative mood, and it equals emotional instability. And it doesn't matter whether it's puberty, or it doesn't matter whether it's the menstrual cycle, or it doesn't matter whether it's pregnancy, and it doesn't matter whether it's menopause. It doesn't matter which direction the hormones are going. In girls, we will say that negative moods are due to hormones, and that's utterly the wrong message. So we have to be very careful about how we start talking about teenagers and their brains, because we tend to focus on deficits. And we tend to go, oh, they're moody, oh, they're aggressive. We're not looking at the upsides of what's happening. And just one final word in this short TED talk about teenagers and their brains. There is this fascinating study that's been done, longitudinal study of childhood, looking at mood and kind of emotional concerns in school and social concerns in school, looking at teenagers entering puberty at different kind of chronological ages. And girls who enter puberty earlier than their friends are much more vulnerable to mental health issues and social issues at school than girls who enter puberty the same age as their friends.
So what about late girls that enter
later,
late?
Not as much. Boys, though, when they enter puberty and they're much earlier than their friends, they typically rise in social stature in their friendship group because they're bigger, taller, hairier and musclier, and they almost become like alpha. But they can kind of get in a little bit more trouble because there's more they're kind of almost kind of developed a little bit beyond their years. So whilst they may be protected in a different way from the social angst that the girls are, because they've got a little cluster of boys around them all looking up to them, it's the late pubertal boys that are the most at risk, because they're kind of lagging behind. And so what you've got is different kids experiencing pubertal hormones at different chronological ages. Their bodies and brains are experiencing hormones for the first time, but the outcomes are dependent on their social context as well. We've got to consider all of these changes taking place within a social context. So I think we really do everyone a disservice if you've got a kid who's about to go to high school, they've started high school, their social world's changed, the educational demands on them have changed, their body's changing, their friends are changing, their friendship groups are changing. And we go, oh, it was the hormones. It's a bit like, oh, it was the iPhones. there's always a lot of factors.
Multi-factor. Insomnia was so much easier to talk about bottom up, top down, outside in. Can I commend you? It's really refreshing to hear you talk about that. I imagine this is quite provocative in some areas you speak in because people want the definitive answer, Dr.
Yes,
Sarah.
you would think the biopsychosocial model would be pretty boring, but let me tell you, menopause in the brain, the world of menopause is wild. It's more wild than adolescence. The biopsychosocial model is not popular there right now.
Is that the next book? So you've done the baby brain.
No, I'm not doing menopause. Let's just say menopause only got invented 5 years ago. That's me being facetious. Menopause and hormone therapy, which we're not going to talk about here, but it's gone from fear and avoidance to FOMO. It's almost like, and it's this,
so true.
And it's having a moment. And the biopsychosocial model is not a popular model in that world right now. So it can be, believe it or not, it is provocative. Who knew? Anyway, it's hard to argue against.
Well, I interviewed a guy named Nick Jones, who's former Mr. World, Australia's leading. If you look at results, Australia's best bodybuilder of the last 10 or 15 years. And we spoke about different peptides, hormone replacement, steroids. And Nick openly spoke about it and spoke about his experience and the science of it. And he's done both. He's studied it and he's been a lab rat himself, or a guinea pig. And he said, if a female is talking about HRT, hormone replacement therapy, people don't go, oh, well, it is so accepted now. And I think about some of my mum's friends, they will just go and see the doctor and just ask for HRT, but they won't look at losing weight or cutting out alcohol or having a more balanced life. They just want the pill, the potion, the bottle, the lotion.
Well, I think everyone likes a pill and a potion to solve a problem. No one wants to. But I think and that's what I suppose education is trying to encourage people to understand and learn for themselves what options there are. And hormone therapy and menopause, hormone therapy is great. Knock yourself out. I think it's brilliant. We all should be offered it, all women everywhere. We've been given the pill out like lollies for our whole lives. It shouldn't be as difficult as it is. But I think that we've got to keep zooming out. We've got to keep zooming out and looking at the bigger picture and it's just a holistic health model, really.
Yeah. I'm going to zoom out and give you a summary of 3 areas you zoomed in on: teenage boys, mood and teenage girls, and puberty going through different ages. It's just so interesting when you said that. And I was watching Shannon furiously type notes, and I'm sure the listener or the viewer on YouTube has thought about their friend. I automatically thought about 2 of my mates at St. John's High School in Dubbo who were the alpha males who went through puberty earlier, and they were naughty and they got into a lot of trouble. Yeah,
they're not as shunned necessarily. Not the girls are shunned, but they have a different experience than an early pubertal girl was. It's the late pubertal boys that are the ones that struggle. The late pubertal girls, not so much. They kind of get there eventually. It's harder for the boys because it's the perceptions that we have of masculinity. I suppose that's probably your more comment on that more than me. But I think it's more about, it's not just the hormones.
So what could a parent of a boy who's going through puberty late do?
Gosh. Well, I've talked to people about this personally. I think ensuring that they've just got a good set of mates around them, like good, kind, generous, gentle, nice boys around them. And 13 and 14 and 15-year-old boys can be gentle and gorgeous and lovely and kind and caring and warm. They're not all hooning around, on bikes, throwing themselves off cliffs. I've got one who does that and one who doesn't. These are personal anecdotes here almost. I think encouraging that and just encouraging, and it's hard, I know, to have conversations with boys. Sometimes the last thing they ever want to do is hear from their mother or their father. And then I also think, we've got to start not just when they're teenagers, but start young and give them so many good, strong, positive male role models who aren't like buffheads, who aren't like alpha males, who aren't macho, that there's so many good ways to be a man and to be a warm, kind, caring, generous, loving man. And we need to start ensuring that those role models are surrounding little boys all the way through.
Great answer. And the second question I've got, can't help but think your two boys have won the lottery as far as role modelling, and you're studying this. You've got a really good understanding.
I don't think they won the lottery.
No one wants to listen to the prophet at home, right? My kids
They
go,
won the lottery
Dad.
with their dad. My husband is, he's the well, he won the lottery with me. Yeah.
Oh, I bet at dinner parties he flips that around too, huh? What do you do with someone, or what's your advice for someone who hasn't got the role modelling? Because if you just think about people who come from really challenging socioeconomic backgrounds, yeah?
Gosh, and I know that's hard. I think that there's a place for grandfathers as well. I know some amazing in my life and my extended family, especially in New Zealand. There are some grandfathers there who are just extraordinary men, and I think all those adults have responsibility to raise these kids. And schools are also important, and not everyone has a choice of schools to go to, but schools are so important in terms of providing, and the school my boys go to, we're incredibly fortunate to be able to send them where they are, has some cool young male teachers who are just like, I think are amazing role models for the boys. You've got to kind of, suppose, look out of the immediate family. But also that's hard because often it ends up being, the onus is ending up being placed on mum to do that. And it shouldn't always have to fall back on her. So that's a hard one if there's, deprivation or poverty or dysfunction in a family. But you just hope there's someone somewhere. I did for my first book, I spoke at great lengths to the dear and late, not recently departed from this world, Richie Poulton, who was a professor of the Dunedin longitudinal study in New Zealand. It just hit 50 years, and they've studied just over 1,000 babies who were born in 1974 in Dunedin, New Zealand, and they've studied every aspect of these people who have now married and had kids and maybe even having grandkids. And he said to me, look, we've underestimated the importance of childhood. And then I was kind of talking to him about, well, what happens to those people who fall through the cracks of society? And he was very, called a spade, like many Kiwis do. And he said, the people that are just shat on by life. And then he said, are you asking me if they're screwed forever? And I said, well, I was, but I was trying to use much more professional language. And then he said, well, he's seen these remarkable turnarounds by just like the love and care and intervention from just one other person. That might be an uncle figure, or it might be a teacher, or it might be a church kind of elder, or it might be a sports coach, or it might be a grandparent, or it might be a therapist. And sometimes one person can come in and show someone like love and care and kindness and support. And I mean, that's at every point in the lifespan. Whenever you look at any brain problem, it's the other people, the other voices in the crowd around you, the actual literal crowd of humans, that is one of the strongest kind of data signals that you're making meaning of.
Mm. We could go so deep down there. I think the importance of community, the importance of connection, and COVID taught us that, didn't it? That we
oh my goodness,
need to have connection.
Yeah, and it taught us how quickly people can become tribal as well. I mean, a lot of the commentary that we have around COVID is, it was so hard because we were all lonely, but it also forced people to become incredibly tribal, and there were in-groups and out-groups, and there was, COVID spreading in that community. They mustn't be good people. That wouldn't happen in our community because we're all good. There was that kind of crazy, it became all very primal.
It was a bizarre global experiment, wasn't it? Imagine getting ethics approval for that. Imagine getting ethics approval. Yeah. So you hated it as a neuroscientist?
I hated the tribalism.
You hated it as a mother? You hated it as a community member? Or is it all
I hated
above?
it without wanting to get into too much, to be perfectly honest. I didn't like how sanctimonious and judgmental and cruel people were to each other because a virus was spreading in a community or a place. It was almost seen as a moral failing, and I just thought that was just so basic and so cruel. I didn't like that side of people and how quickly they became that way.
Let's zoom out. Gee, we've danced, haven't we? We've zoomed in, we've zoomed out, we've come in, we've come out. I love
My
that.
neuroscience is so cool.
I love your framework on that. A much easier, less political topic to talk about is the power of napping. You say, one day I was so tired that I dropped and smashed a full glass bottle of concentrated hydrochloric acid all over the floor in the lab. This sleepy little mishap resulted in the evacuation of the entire lab, and I had to call the hazardous chemicals response unit.
Yeah, that's from my TED Talk. You've really done your homework. I think that was my opening gambit in the TED Talk on afternoon naps. I should have given it a different title because I don't think it's had justice because the title was obscure. But, you learn.
It's all about the title in TED Talks. I've clicked on some and gone, that's pretty shitty. And then others I've sort of gone, I've been told to watch it. And you look at the title.
I'm always I'll be annoyed about that forever. But anyway.
Can you change the title or do you have to do a different talk?
No, I'd have to do another one. Yeah, no, well, I was asked to do a TED Talk and I was like, and they were like, well, you can talk about anything. And I was like, gosh, what am I going to talk about? But I quickly decided I wanted to talk about the neurobiology of afternoon naps and that. And I've always loved sleep and been fond of napping for many years. When I was at school and university, it was kind of impossible because I had a very busy lecture schedule and I used to get to 2:30 every day, and just the sleep drive was my circadian rhythms, as I've come to understand. I should have been born in Spain or somewhere where there is a siesta, but I wouldn't have done well there either because I also like going to bed early. I just really like being asleep.
But you also like going out, so you would have been really torn because you want to go out dancing.
I used to like going out when I was younger. Now I like going to bed. I don't know how I used to. You remember you used to go out at like 11 p.m.?
Oh, the wood in Spain. I remember the first time I was in Spain with a mate of mine. We're travelling and we were out. It was 11 o'clock. We're like, God, this is pretty shit. We were out downtown Barcelona on the water. We're going, these Spaniards, where are they? And then literally about 10 past midnight, the place erupted. And they stay out until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. That's when I get up, Sarah, and exercise.
I can't do that, but I do like their siestas. Yeah, so I always had a very, very, very strong, almost overwhelming difficulty with staying awake in the middle of the day until I kind of learned a little bit about napping, and I was, in situations where I could do it. Although I did used to, go and hide and dark. Back in the day when we used to develop photos that we took down the microscope in dark rooms with the dark room chemicals, and there were always places to kind of hide away and nap. And once I kind of sort of started integrating that and learning a little bit of the science about how to optimize that, then and it's about the only time I use the word optimize because I hate that word. I now would nap. I didn't nap today actually, but I reckon I would probably nap at least 4 afternoons a week. In short, the best way to nap is to keep it short and to keep it strategic. Because if you are napping because you are sick or you are underslept and overtired and you just go and lie down and then sleep for 2 hours in an afternoon, you'll probably wake up feeling terrible, and it will take you time to kind of wake up properly. You have what we call sleep inertia. You just will feel like crap, and that's because you've gone down into these deep, deep stages of sleep and you've kind of come back up they've risen up out of them. It's like swimming up through, a pool of treacle or something. And we know that will go on and perhaps disrupt your sleep later that night. Whereas a strategic nap is something different, where you're not sleeping ever for longer than half an hour, and you're getting the benefits of a longer sleep without the downsides.
And half an hour, getting a bit nerdy with you on stages of sleep. So you're going to go through stage 1 and 2. Is that where you want to pull out?
Yeah, you might go through the first couple of stages of sleep, and some people might, have their different. They'll get into different stages of sleep in different amounts of time, because some people, when you do this as often as I do, and I've spoken to a lot of strategic nappers, if I kind of come across them and meet them, and people will say, I nap too, and we'll talk about how we do it, and people are very specific about how they do it, and have very defined methods. They're what I call strategic nappers. You can usually fall asleep within a minute or two, whereas some people might take 10 minutes. So it depends how long you're asleep, how many stages you've gone through, but you're not getting into the deep stages of sleep. But essentially what you're doing is sleeping enough to, as I talked about before with the caffeine and the sleep drive, you've got this increasing sleep drive during the day, and different people have got a different sensitivity to that, we think, or maybe they release different amounts of the molecule adenosine, or perhaps they've got different numbers of receptors. We're not entirely sure. There's probably research out there, but I haven't looked it up lately. And as the sleep drive goes up, you feel sleepier and sleepier. And when you fall asleep, you're kind of releasing all of that adenosine out of those receptors. You're kind of clearing it out. With just a tiny amount of sleep, you can burst it all out, and then you wake up, and the sleep drive has gone all the way back down again. And so you feel less sleepy. And the knock-on effects of that are you just feel more emotionally regulated. So you're knocked all the rough emotional edges off your day. Instead of fighting, staying awake, you've just indulged it, given into it.
I love an
20
afternoon
minutes.
nap, and it's that 20, 30 minutes max. I find 20 to 25 is about right for me. If my brain's really running, if I've done a podcast or talk, or I've been writing some content and I'm still processing and I haven't down-regulated, I might need a bit longer just to breathe and relax. So I find that 20 to 25 minutes is a sweet spot. I'll do it 2 or 3 times a week, Sarah, where I can fit it in. And like you, I'll push it hard with kids, a busy life, busy corporate life as well. And it's a kickstart to then power into the afternoon. So, I love a strategic nap.
People often say, how do you wake up? You say, well, you set an alarm. It's no magic trick. It's not like you've programmed your brain. And you can have a coffee before you nap if you're not napping too late in the day. And in my experience, strategic nappers, and I don't know, you sound like one, do you sleep very well at nighttime? Good night. Most strategic nappers, I've once met a strategic napper, and I don't actually think she was quite as strategic as what she thought. Most strategic nappers sleep very well at night. They're not the kind of people who, you don't get strategic nappers with insomnia. And I think that's because we've learned to lean into sleep and to just kind of let it take us away. We don't fight sleep, because there's a strong psychological component there.
Yeah. I don't get enough sleep. I know I push it. I'll get up early and exercise, and I don't go to bed late now, but I would love to get another half hour a night. But I know that if I do get a nap a couple of times during the week, it's just a beautiful refresh and picks me up.
One of the upsides of having teenagers is now I can go to bed before them. I don't need to put them to bed. But one of the downsides is if they go out, it's then hard to fall asleep until they come home. Even though their curfew's not that late, I like to be in bed. It's even worse if they need a pickup.
Yeah, we've got a 15-year-old, 12-year-old, 3 and 2, so we've got both sides.
Oh, gosh.
But the power of napping, I love that you're talking about that and normalising it, because I think a lot of people think it's weak. Oh, you need a nap, you're soft. Yeah.
No, well, it enhances your cognition. It enhances your memories. Every study out there that looks at learning something new, some kind of skill, remembering anything, learning anything, text in a book, navigating through a maze, a new physical motor skill. If you sleep afterwards, even if you nap afterwards, you will have a better retention of that. You will have learned it. You will consolidate and double down on what you've learned with the sleep, because that is what sleep is doing.
So
it is consolidating learning.
Going to bed the night before exam, or in your case, the night before you do an interview, and mine is the same. If I do early morning TV, I want to know that afternoon or that night, so that you relax, go to bed, sleep on it. And you're saying the neuroscience around that, you're putting it in a memory, wake up, refresh, then you have recall, and you surprise yourself. Yeah,
you're 100% better off sleeping than doing an all-nighter.
Absolutely. Well, let's go from sleep to living a long, long time. We could do a whole podcast on this, so we'll go high level. Brain health and longevity. You did a great documentary on ABC Catalyst. I'll quote the marketing lead. Are you allowed to say marketing lead with ABC? We'll quote the positioning description on the ABC Catalyst documentary with Dr. Sarah McKay in Australia. 1 in 40 of us born today will live until we are 100, yet many of us will live our later years in poor health. In my ABC Catalyst documentary, I explore the extraordinary new science about how to keep our brains healthy into old age. Now, that is a positioning. We could do a whole podcast on that. Can you give me 3 or 4 areas, activities, targets for people to focus on to have that wonderful neuroplasticity, connection, brain function well into our 70s, 80s, 90s and beyond?
Yeah, I think There were a couple of things we didn't look at in that show, although we were looking at Australians, because I think all of the choices lifestyle choices that we can make aside to essentially do what Queen Elizabeth II did, which was to have our health span and our lifespan neatly match up. Ideally, we would all want to be in an incredibly engaged and intellectually, socially enriched job like meeting prime ministers. Not everyone would want to do that. I actually think it would be kind of interesting being a royal. But we want, to be working up to the day before we die, or at least like living our best life. We don't want to be spending kind of our last 5-10 years incapacitated in a nursing home, no matter how long or short we live. So that's kind of like the ideal. And I guess the Queen ticked off that the first kind of longevity box when she was born into socioeconomic privilege, because we know that it's undoubtedly true that if you were born into poverty, you will not have as a longer, healthier life as someone born into socioeconomic privilege. But not all of us
so
can
choose your parents.
Choose your parents well, but they choose not just healthy parents, choose wealthy parents too. And I'm not being trite by that. I mean, because it does give you less stressors as a kind of a family or a house, or, growing up. You've got more opportunities. You have access to healthier food. You have access to better education. You have access to healthcare. Depending where you are in the world, they may be more or less accessible. So it's pretty clear if we look kind of globally, over centuries at longevity statistics, that as countries kind of work their way up out of poverty and kind of move from, what we might have called once third world or developing, kind of up the rankings a bit, that the longevity of those populations increases. So we can't always do anything about that, but that's an unfortunate truth that wealth, socioeconomic privilege help you live longer. But then there's all of the other things that you can do. And there were a couple that I think sort of showed up so beautifully in that catalyst. And I won't go with the usual, eat a healthy diet. That's kind of boring, and exercise. It's kind of boring, but we know all of that. One of the scenes in that show, we went and met some what we call these sort of super agers. So these people, these extraordinary people in their 80s and 90s who are cognitively fit and sharp as a tack. They're actually quite physically well and healthy as well. And we went to a hedgerow maze, near Melbourne. So one of those mazes made out of a hedge. And we spent a day filming there, and we kind of got I called them the elders. And then they had their kind of children and grandchildren with them who were like the younger cohort. And actually it was interesting because they were all in their 40s and 50s, and they were all looked a lot younger than their chronological age. So there's definitely biological longevity in the genes of those families. And we ran the elders and the youngers, we got them to compete navigating their way through a maze. And what was interesting was that the younger ones were quicker, but they made way more mistakes along the way. The elders were very slow and methodical and wise and thoughtful, which I also think is something that we could take on board when we think about ageism, that sometimes you can be slow because your reactions are slower and your thinking speed's slower. But if you can harness that wisdom and the decision-making and the carefulness, that can compensate from scampering around quickly, But the main thing that I took away from that was those people. I have never met a bunch of people who are so curious about life. And we had we had the film crew, there was the camera, the sound guys, there was all of this, there was drones, there was all this technology, and they were just utterly captivated. We were there for 12 hours. I was exhausted. They were just interested and captivated and engaged and curious about every person, every piece of technology, every moment of that day. Oh, there's a drone. We've never seen a drone. How do you fly the drone? Tell us about the drone. Can we see you fly? How did you learn? They were just, all of them would be gathered around looking at the drone and learning about the drone. It was like a little bunch of 7-year-old boys seeing a drone for the first time. And we'd sit down for lunch, and they couldn't stop peppering me with questions, wanting to know about me, and they'd never met each other before. But I thought there's something in that, like this curiosity and passion and willingness to engage with the world, and they're not in themselves. They were just absorbing life. And I thought it was so interesting. And I've mulled over that so much and talked to my husband about it. And we kind of feel like our boys are teenagers now and life just goes by so quick. And then we had a family dog who died last year, and we were going, oh, those good old days are behind us of that dog and our boys being at primary school. We didn't know they were the good old days. And I thought, we've got to keep looking out and being curious and what's next, and kind of just remember that the good old days are next. And those people showed me it didn't really matter that they were all in their 90s. This was like the good old days for them. Today was this extraordinary day for them because they made it extraordinary by how they interacted.
There's a beautiful Victorian picture, and underneath it, it's got, these are the good old days. I love that because you look back and similar. Tony, my partner, we were talking on the weekend and she said to me, oh gosh, I can't believe like Sophia is just growing up so much. She's 4 and is becoming a big girl. Like these are the good days, because then when she's 10, we'll go, oh, can you remember when she was 4? And I think from what you're saying, seeing you light up, like you light up about everything you talk about. The 2 things today that have really piqued your interest was when you're talking about the study and zooming in and then zooming out. And the other one was when you're talking about the elders, and you use that term beautifully. The curiosity.
Yeah, I just thought, just like get out of your own head and into the world, and don't ever stop, never stop. So I learned that was one, and we didn't really define that in the show, but for me that was one of my personal learnings. And then the other was a bit more emotional. It was kind of the final scene, and we'd gone and we were doing this kind of community choir in an aged care home because we wanted to kind of create some sort of social activity. Now we would talk about collective effervescence, or a way of connecting people together and having a look to see whether how that would impact their stress levels and their overall kinds of experiences together. The idea that bringing people together with a shared purpose, and in this case it was to put on a performance, a choir performance, would that reduce their stress levels? And initially it didn't, actually. Initially lots of people's stress levels went up because obviously it was something new and confronting, but then over time it did. And one of the most remarkable stories was a woman who had quite terrible sleep apnea, and she said she used to wake up, like the sleep apnea machine would be picking up sort of 50, 60, 100 wakings during the night. But since she started singing, she said she was down to like less than 10. And that, again, that was like extraordinary. And we didn't really kind of pull on that thread either, because it wasn't kind of the overall gist of the show. It was probably partly all about singing and throat. But just how, like, these ways that you can go in and purposefully intervene with, like kind of a reason to just make people's lives more connected and together and introduce them to doing something new. Like we had to go in and do that. The Melbourne elders were naturally that way inclined, but in this case we had to kind of go in and engineer some new engaging activity that would challenge them and stimulate them, and then just the kind of the outcomes that we saw from that.
I think you need to give your executive producer a buzz, Sarah, and say, hey, we need to come back and do season 2, because it's just those 2 themes, that curiosity, and that it sounds like it's aligned with lifelong learning and not just checking in. You're still living and rolling through the decades. Hey, do you know, or have you met or have you read any of Carl Honoret's work?
No, I haven't.
So he's known as the godfather of the slow movement. He wrote the book In Praise of Slow, which is now
right. Yeah, I've heard now. Yeah,
sold in the millions. Great guy. I'll connect you with him. You guys need to chat. He's also written a book on aging, and he talks about the genesis of this story. Like Carl always lives something, and it's that on-the-moment home, on a bus, flying somewhere, doing a talk, and he just can't let go of the idea, and it rattles in his head. And that's where it was slow cities in Italy. He saw there how all these Westerners go and they're asking, what time is my meal out? And the nonna goes, when it's ready. And he just saw this whole contrast between the way the Western world is and even going to Italy and wanting everything downloaded, drop and drag society. And the idea or the genesis of aging healthy came when he was the oldest, in inverted commas, in his early 50s. It's roller hockey. It's like ice skating, but on roller skates. And he and his team won their tournament in London. And then one of his teammates said, you're the oldest person in this tournament, Carl. And he just wrestled on the way home. Went, that can't be. So then he started looking at, why don't we celebrate age? So, we go up until a certain age. Like my kids, I'm 4. Like, Sarah, like, I can't wait. Sophia is just obsessed about her 4th birthday because she's all about unicorns and fairies and everything. But Carl said, I've just celebrated my 54th level. And he said, and then next year I'm going to get to level 55. So he looks at it like a computer game.
I'm calling it numbers at the moment, but it is levels. That makes so much sense. It's hard when you're a woman out there in the world too, because you're fighting this extraordinary expectation of how to age well and what that looks like. And I find that very challenging. And I'm like, I'm 50 next January, actually. And I'm like, when do you stop? When does that pressure stop? It drives me crazy. Like, it's so hard to throw off.
Yeah. See, when you say there's a female, obviously I don't have experience as a female to answer that, but my role model is my mum, and mum's level 76, and a lot of her friends are 20 years younger because she just loves hanging around. She attracts younger people. So she's got a spirit about her. So I don't think mum thinks she's old at all.
Yeah. It's not the acting. And because I've got loads of friends and we do hilarious things together and we do all kinds of fun stuff. But it's the perception of how you look, and it's the Botox, and it's the drive to be slim that we all absorbed in the 90s, and it's, you know, the anti-aging kind of messaging, and it's so hard to fight. You have to be so strong, and I find that quite challenging. But I'm determined to go on fighting it. But yeah, there are a lot of pressures, and I feel them. And I talk to my husband about this. He doesn't feel that, but every woman my age does. We all know what that's like, and particularly if you're even slightly online or you have some kind of personal branded business.
I got some friends in TV, radio, public profile, and
brutal.
And it is like it is much different for a guy. Like, guy loses his hair, shave your head. And I go, it's just part of aging. It is.
Become a silver fox.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right, even the terms for men.
Radio's all right. But yeah, it is. And you're constantly working. I think that's just a constant thing and I talk about this all the time with women my age. So I find, but I'm also determined because I'm turning 50, and that's a big kind of thing, you know. It's
only level 50. You're going to get to level 100.
Yeah, but there's a lot biologically going on at this age too, right? If you're a woman. And so got quite a few plans in place for celebrating next year. My husband's also turning 50. So I think it's and I've got friends who, you know, a friend, my oldest friend, who I went through kindergarten, primary school and high school with, died in October last year from ovarian cancer. She only made it to 49, you know. So I've always got, you know, that kind of reminder in me. But I do think that it's hard to be confronted with this world, particularly if you're in any way online or do anything out there in public, to fight the appearance-driven expectations. It's so much easier just to, like, you know, grow up there behind your calls and let yourself go. Huh?
Yeah, is that expectation you putting that on yourself? Is it other people putting it on you?
I don't want to say it's the patriarchy, but I mean, you swim in it from when you're a young girl. It's hard to separate it from yourself when it's a message that you've absorbed your entire life. But if you're aware of it, I think you're one step there. But even if you're aware of it, it doesn't go away, because I've been working on that one for a while.
Well, it's good that we're at least talking about it, because 10, 15 years ago wouldn't have even been elevated. But I do acknowledge the experience I've got, friends in media especially, it gets a lot more challenging for women in their sort of mid to late 40s, because it's a visual game.
Yeah, it's brutal.
But who's to say, and let's roll into the future of neuroscience and largely linked to the future of longevity. Most people born into a house with, you know, enough money to have good food and education, as you mentioned before, the lifespan is 90 to 100 years. Now, that's been challenged by technology. The US Surgeon General last year said the first time ever that children born now won't live as long as their parents.
Well, that's in the US.
In the US, yeah. And that's because of three key areas. It's shitty foods, processed foods. It's overuse of the sympathetic nervous system, too much technology and lack of movement. But let's say a lot of people listening to this do have capacity. We talk about genetics, epigenetics, as long as you stay healthy, body, brain, community connection, to live to 90, 100. I'd like to think we can challenge that 45, 50's only halfway there, level 45, 50. So rolling that into neuroscience and the future of neuroscience, where do you see it, or where would you like it to take us?
I sometimes feel a little bit concerned with the over focus, especially within the kind of, the science bros of the world, that there's this focus on optimization, and it's very self-centered and very self-driven, and it's very about self. So I suppose it's a very American kind of focus on making me better. And you can't look inward and look outward and build a community and build connections. You can't do both at the same time. So whilst, some people may be using technology to drive, towards this optimized self who's long living and super healthy, I sometimes think that we fail to understand how connected we are to the world around us and the people that we're with too. So, but I'm sure in time that, will be part of it, and that will rebalance. I mean, for me, I don't know what's in the future, but right now, for me, the most exciting advances are coming from, I spoke about it earlier, the idea that we're getting better data, and we can say with more certainty what we couldn't even 10 years ago, because we're pooling together all this information. We've got these biobanks which are just kind of growing in information. The UK biobank, for example, has data from tens of thousands of people, and it's not just got their brain scans and their dental records and series of blood neurine tests over the course of every year, but it's got people's stories of their autobiographical history and their education and who they married and their children and their work and what books they like to read. There's all of this information that we're gathering and is growing and growing and growing. And we've now got technologies that can go in and analyze all of this data which is emerging from that. And so we can sort of say with more certainty what we couldn't say before. So I think that data and that information is giving us more insights into what matters. And I mean, just to kind of fly the flag for, having written 2 books on women's health, women have been forever considered just kind of a niche of humans. Women are a niche. Women's health is even more of a niche. It's just sort of seen as this kind of variation from the standard, and there's been this utter neglect. And the best examples of that for anyone listening, whether they are male or not, and if you are, you probably know and love girls and women in your lives, the first studies looking to see what happened to human, female brains during the course of a pregnancy was published in 2017, and the first studies looking to see what happens to women's brains during menopause was published in July 2021. So 2.5 years ago. For
real, only 2.5 years.
We know more information about left-handedness than we know about so many aspects of women's health. It's kind of crazy, and that's just because men never ask the questions. There's always been a lot of women in neuroscience, and there's always been gender parity, particularly in the undergrad years, but to kind of work your way up through the ranks, so you're at the point where you're asking questions that have never occurred to anyone before, and what really matter, it's the women that have been asking those questions and getting the data and getting the research funding for a start, convincing someone that's important. And so now, we're starting to understand about this niche that's not a niche, and I think that there's that's going to open up a whole new. If half the population, we're interested in longevity, we've got to understand why half the population lives slightly longer but in less health than the other half, because women live longer but with less good health in those later years than men. So if we're really interested in those last 5 years, the science bros have got to be thinking about female biology too.
Well, as the father of 3 young daughters, I totally align. I want my daughters to have more information as well at their fingertips.
Yeah. And also it's also scientifically interesting, right? So one of the researchers I spoke to in my second book, Baby Brain, she's like a kind of a computational data analysis neuroscientist, and she was doing all of these brain scans on women in their kind of 70s, 80s and 90s and looking to see whether you could sort of still see traces of pregnancy. So if a brain had experienced pregnancy, could we pick that up in the brain of an 80-year-old? And so she went off to one of these data analysis conferences, and she said it's like that it's 95% male dominated, because it's like kind of a real hard mathsy science, and that's where there's more of the males than the female. And then she was like, oh my God, well, they're going to think we're here talking about like motherhood and the brain. And she said actually they were fascinated because it's scientifically interesting. It's not just women matter too. It's scientifically fascinating research. It's intellectually cool and interesting. So that's what kind of comes from asking the right kinds of questions and having different people in there asking those questions and opening up like whole new fields of research that never even existed 10 years ago.
When you say research bros in the tone you say it, I can't help but think of guys with the science bros.
I do say it in a really dismissive way.
You do. I can't help but think of guys with glasses.
I'm a nearly 50-year-old woman. I can dismiss them.
That have grey hair.
I'm not dismissing them. I'm just
wispy beard.
Deriding them slightly.
Elbow patches. Hey, we've covered a lot today. We've covered neuroscience and what it is. We've discovered some of the utility and application of neuroscience. We've spoken about napping, and then we've spoken about the future of neuroscience. In wrapping up, is there a question that you will hang up and go, oh, I wish you'd asked me that question? Is there a question I haven't asked yet? Or the flip, is there a question you want to ask me?
That's too challenging. I'm not a very good interviewer. I wouldn't be able to come up with any question.
So I need a nap.
Why don't you ask me something that you haven't asked yet?
Shannon, Frosty, what's a question you'd like to ask
Shannon.
Dr. Sarah?
What does Shannon want to know?
What do you want to know? Shannon said, aligned with what you were talking about women and researching, what do you want to, or what mark do you want to leave on the world? What do you want to be known for?
Oh, man, that makes me feel like weirdly emotional.
Good.
Well, I mean, I don't really care about the rest of the world. I'm not really interested in leaving a mark on the world. I just want my boys to like grow, be happy, functional adults. And, they make me so proud, and I want them to just continue doing that. And for me and my husband to live long, heartily healthy lives so we can kind of watch them go the whole way through adulthood. And we'll probably have a few different dogs along the way with us. And so long as I can achieve that and I can go for a swim in the ocean, a few times a week, I don't really care to leave a mark on the world. It's more about just enjoying the little family I'm in.
Shannon's smiling and giving you a big thumbs up. Now, for those listening to this, we have a large corporate audience, Sarah. A lot of people around the world listen now as well. Those who would like to book you at their conference or a massive roadshow. We love roadshows.
Oh, yes.
So those people.
I have a few good corporate talks.
Great. How do they find you? How do people get in contact with you? Or even if it's to buy your books or to even get you to come and consult to some companies about putting neuroscience into their practice, because it's such application for all businesses. Where do we find you?
Yep. So the portal into all things Sarah is Dr. Sarah McKay, MCKAY.com. Some people pronounce it McKay, but I pronounce it the Scottish way. And there's all information in there about the various, kind of talks I do, and links to buy my books and all links to my courses, and just follow the menu.
And we'll put all those details on the show notes. We'll get that summary as well, because I love the framework, bottom up, top down, outside in. I love the zoom in, zoom out. And there's an open loop. If I don't ask, I'll listen back to this and go, oh, I needed to ask her that. This was from way back and I didn't want to interrupt you. You're in flow, so I've left it hanging.
Oh, yeah. I tend to be long-winded.
Or you're passionate. When the next Rugby World Cup is on, who on earth do you follow? Because your husband is from Ireland.
Irish.
You are born in New Zealand. You live in Australia.
Look, I got a bit cranky with New Zealand the last few years when they locked out overseas Kiwis. Didn't let anyone come home. So I stopped supporting the All Blacks a little bit. And then when they played Ireland in the Rugby World Cup, I actually supported Ireland because I think the All Blacks have had their run. I also
for 20 years, yeah.
I've supported the Canterbury Crusaders because I grew up and they're having a terrible season.
Well, I'm happy. I work with the New South Wales Waratahs, so we beat them. So I was very happy about that.
Usually the Waratahs aren't too exciting either. I won't look, and I have a lot of issues with rugby, and we haven't even talked about sports concussions and CTE and all of that. I think it is interesting because when the All Blacks lost, I didn't feel devastated. But I probably would support them if I had to put a jersey on. I would probably support the All Blacks. Ireland would be such a close second because I really think that they deserve, and it's much more fun being an Irish supporter because they have hilarious fun no matter what. Kiwis can be.
They take it a bit serious. Also, Ireland were number one leading into the last two World Cups.
And the Wallabies, we can't talk about Wallabies in rugby because it's just shameful.
Well, it can only get better. But hey, there's a solution for you.
Well, it could get worse.
Joe Schmidt, because Joe Schmidt has coached the Ireland rugby team and he worked in provincial. He's a Kiwi. Yeah, he's from Christchurch and he's now coaching Australia. So maybe Joe will get you back on the Wallabies bus.
Yeah. So no, you're right. I have a complex relationship with rugby these days.
I think you need to see a good neuroscientist to try to help you zoom in, zoom out, and maybe put some meaning to it all. Hey, I've really enjoyed today. I've enjoyed the science and I've enjoyed some of the colour as well. And there's some really good frameworks. I'll make sure we angle people towards your socials, towards your website, because really we've just covered this in micro detail and there's loads of areas you can go deep in. I think my summary for people is just learn more about your body, your brain and how it functions. And neuroscience is a wonderful tool to help you understand, especially that biopsychosocial model. Sounds big, but when you apply that framework, looking at just multiple components, it really helps you have more of awareness, which is ultimately what we want to teach in this podcast. And it's ultimately what I want to give people, I can see you do as well, just a little bit more understanding on, or a user's manual, how to use, the software, the hardware we come with.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. We'll have to get you on again. There's multiple topics I think we can go deeper, and we might start with rugby next time rather than finishing.
I can go on about lots of topics at great length because I spend all my time thinking and talking about this. So I've covered a fair whack.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.